During the late 1800s and early 1900s, European countries colonized Africa. This was called the "scramble for Africa," and it had a huge impact on the continent's politics, economy, and society. Colonial governments set up fake borders that crossed real racial and culture lines. This caused ongoing battles and political unrest in many areas. In terms of the economy, colonial strategies put a lot of emphasis on getting resources for European use. This led to the growth of economies that were based on a single product. This focus made it harder for different economies to grow, and it left many African countries open to changes in the global market. Africa's current relationships with Britain and China, on the other hand, are based on mutual respect and shared rewards. Russia has built strategic relationships in Africa by agreeing to work together on military issues, sending a lot of weapons, and investing in mines and energy. China is very involved in trade and investment in infrastructure. Programs like the Belt and Road Initiative are driving projects in trains, roads, and ports, which improves communication and economic growth. Between the early 1900s and now, relations between Russia and African countries have changed a lot. Russia's role in Africa was not very important. The violent colonial growth of Western European powers during the scramble for Africa got more attention. Russia's relations with Africa were patchy, ranging from religious ties to exploring trips and even some political efforts. In 1897, the Russian Empire opened a consulate in Tangier, Morocco, as part of a larger plan to be involved in international politics and gain a base in North Africa. This was one of the first official activities. During the decolonization wave that happened in Africa in the 1950s and 1960s, the Soviet Union used the chance to gain more power by forming partnerships with liberation groups and newly independent countries. Moscow positioned itself as a leader in the fight against colonialism, providing military, economic, and moral support to counter Western control on the continent. By taking this method, the Soviet Union was able to support the goals of African countries that were looking for options to the imperial powers that had ruled them in the past. The ideologically similar Soviet-backed development projects strengthened the ties between Moscow and Africa, showing how these ties could affect the growth of the continent. Over the years, the Soviet Union's political and military involvement in Africa has changed a great deal. At the beginning of the 20th century, China's only interactions with Africa were small-scale trade in the presence of Chinese workers in European colonies. Around the middle of the 20th century, China and many African countries were both fighting against colonialism and empire. This made people in China feel more united, and China actively supported African liberation groups by giving them money, training, and official recognition. China helped many liberation movements across the continent by giving them combat training, teaching them about their ideas and money. They especially helped groups in southern Africa like Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and South Africa that were fighting against white minority rule and colonial abuse. China also played a big role in supporting by working with and recognizing newly freed African countries through diplomatic means. As an example, China backed Algeria's National Liberation Front in 1958 and sent weapons to the new government. In the early 2000s, Russia began a strategic re-engagement with Africa in the 21st century. They wanted to renew old relationships and make new ones all over the continent. This new focus included business projects, military cooperation, and political outreach. It showed Russia's desire to regain its power in an area where the West and China had been the main players. By 2024, Russia had signed military cooperation deals with 43 African countries. This showed that it was serious about improving defense ties across the continent. The early 20th century saw little contact between China and Africa. Now, the two countries have a close partnership that includes economic, political, and cultural aspects. At the beginning of the 20th century, China's only interactions with Africa were small-scale trade in the presence of Chinese workers in European colonies. Around the middle of the 20th century, China and many African countries were both fighting against colonialism and empire. This made people in China feel more united, and China actively supported African liberation groups by giving them money, training, and official recognition. In the late 20th century, China started to have diplomatic ties with Africa. This was its first official diplomatic presence on the continent. China's later interactions with Africa, like opening a trade office in Cairo in 1956, were based on this connection. China also helped liberation groups in other African countries, like the Mozambique Liberation Front in Guinea-Bissau. China changed its goals to become more modern and improve its ties with other countries, especially those in Africa. The Tanzania-Zambia Railway, TAZARA, which was built from 1970 to 1975, was a big part of this program. Its goal was to make Zambia less economically dependent on Rwanda and South Africa. At that time, the train was China's biggest project of foreign help in Africa. It cost about $46 million. China had normalized ties with 44 African countries by 1979, thanks to its diplomacy attempts. The strengthening of bilateral links has made China's foreign policy and place in the world much better. Respect and teamwork were at the heart of the relationships, which set the stage for the rapid growth of China-Africa ties in the decades that followed. China has become Africa's biggest business partner in the 21st century. By 2021, trade between the two will have reached $254 billion. The Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, FOCAC, and the Belt and Road Initiative, BR, have helped build this strong business relationship. These efforts have led to big investments in infrastructure, energy, and telecommunications across the region. In the past few years, teamwork has grown to include areas like science, education, and healthcare. China promised that it would spend in green energy and new technologies to create 1 million jobs in Africa over the next 3 years. Through a number of great projects that have improved trade, communication, and economic growth, the Belt and Road Initiative has made a big difference in Africa's infrastructure. Some important projects that have been finished are the Addis Ababa-Djibouti Railway in 2016, the Mombasa-Nairobi Standard Gauge Railway in 2017, and the Maputo-KMI Bridge in Mozambique in 2018. Africa will play a bigger part in the BRICS, which will give it more chances to shape global economic policies and push for a more fair world order. Finally, BRICS support for Africa has changed from helping liberation groups to building economic relationships that encourage resilient growth and long-term development. There are ways for Africa to change its course, going from a past of hardship to a future of shared wealth and joint progress through these partnerships.